I'm sure you've noticed we're in the heart of Barolo right now. You got La Mora up there, you got the other villages in the back. We are basically on the northern side of the Barolo area, which is made of 11 villages, 11 communes. And right now, between these 11 villages, this is reading the newspapers, it's true, we have about 700 wineries. It's huge, it's crazy. Every house you see, basically, there's a winery today. But what you see today is not what it was, back, not 1,000 years ago, but back basically just 30, 40 years ago. People were living, they had vineyards, but they were selling most of the grapes. They were all selling them to the negociants, to the cooperatives. Most of the people, like my grandpa, had plums and cherries and corn and peaches, they had orchards and animals, chickens, cows, and they were making a living out of everything. There was a bunch of crazy winemakers, or crazy youngsters at that time, like my dad and a group of other winemakers like Mr. Clerico, Mr. Scavino, that started this huge revolution. They were the first to think that you could make a living out of wine. You could make a living out of these beautiful hills that once were mostly covered with fruit trees and sometimes woods as well. Now you just see vineyards. It's vineyards everywhere. And it just started from literally a necessity. My father says that it was very frustrated to see that just next door, you go to the Burgundy, 5 hours and a half away, those guys were making amazing wines, were becoming famous, who had money, they were rich, they were popular, and you were coming just here, people were starving. My father said when he was a kid, they didn't have money to buy meat. He was killing with the, what do you call that thing that you pull and you throw?
Catapults.
With the catapult, they were killing the little birds so they could eat, because there was no meat to eat, and that's not 1,000 years ago. My dad is just 60. So they were definitely poor. So my dad and his friends were asking themselves, how come next door those guys are like rich, famous, making money and having a good living and we can't here? So they figured it out that they had to work the vineyards in a different way. And the goal was not to make lots of grapes, but reduce the quantities to make a better quality of the grapes, so better quality of the wine after. The techniques in the cellar were much different. So the big change is really, to make the story short, because I could talk 4 hours about it. It's a big difference from my grandpa's winemaking and what they were doing 40 years ago and today. Big, huge difference in the vineyards. Lots of grapes, now very little grapes. Completely organic today. Most of the wineries today are organic. Lots of chemicals in the past, because more chemicals, more production, more money. So no chemicals, organic today, very little grapes. And in the vineyards, in the cellar, the maceration has been shortened down from a month and a half as it was in the past. Maceration is physically the chemical reaction when you turn the sugar, the juice, into wine. So that was like a month long, and today is about 5 days, because we have machines and techniques. And the aging is not in the big vats anymore, it's just in small French barriques, small barrels. But to go back to your question 25 minutes ago, well, green harvest is basically this reduction I was talking about. Let's say you have, well, you can have a look here. You have the vine, then you have your main cane, and from the cane you have the little buds that are going to start breaking. Actually, they start breaking now. And from the buds there will be shoots growing up, right? And every shoot usually grows a couple bunches. So there'll be 2 bunches on each shoot. So what we do, we usually leave a bunch per shoot. So at the end, let's say we leave 5, 6 shoots. Instead of 12 grapes, we have only 5. And that reduction is done during, well, let's say July, late July, beginning of August. It's right before Verizon. So when the grapes from green start change color and turn basically purple, pink. And then there's a second green harvest, which is done right before harvest, end of August, to reduce even more. Let's say some specific grapes like Barbera, they have the main bunch, and then they grow what we call the ears. So they grow some extra berries, whatever, and we go through and we cut those very quick. Or sometimes Nebbiolo is a very long bunch, you cut the top. So there's a second selection, you can say, or a second check you do before harvest, because the point is that you want to get to harvest and just be sure it's perfect. You don't have to do anything but cut. Of course, you still do some picking and make sure there's no damaged berries or mold or infection, but you want to get to harvest when it's just like fast. But this is super important because we don't believe in, basically no one believes in concentration, like a chemical concentration or physical concentration with machines in the cellar, but we concentrate naturally in the vineyards. So instead of having 12 bunches, you have 6. Of course, they're going to be more juicy and ripe, and all the energy goes to those little 5s. So Barolo is not a grape. The grape is Nebbiolo. So the area is mostly planted with Nebbiolo. And the area is mostly planted with the red varieties, actually. The indigenous grapes are Dolcetto, Barbera, Nebbiolo. Nebbiolo, since it's the king of all these 3 grapes, it's planted on south exposures. So south is this way. And on the best vineyards, you want to plant your best grapes. So on our best exposure, we planted Nebbiolo, and here it's where Barolo Arborina is made. Then usually right on the top of the hills where it's more windy and it's less humid, because that's how Barbera likes it, you plant Barbera. And then on the northern side, which is the less lucky side, you plant the cheapest stuff, which is Dolcetto. Magically, after 4 years becomes Barolo. But in these 4 years, you have to follow specific rules about the winemaking, which the rules about the aging. It's 2 years in wood. There's about a year in tank to blend, and there's about a year in bottle before you sell it. So any Barolo can be put on the market after 4 years. So right now, 2011, we will release in about a month, 2007. Then you can decide to release in January or September, whatever. But it has to be 4 years. From the same grape, Nebbiolo, we also produce Barbaresco. So you got the big guy, 4 years Barolo. Then you got Barbaresco, 3 years of aging. And the smaller guy, Roero. So the difference is only where it's made. In this area, we're in the Barolo appellation, so we're lucky to be able to call it Barolo. Just 10 kilometers that way is Barbaresco. Same grape, same vineyards, same treatments, different area, Barbaresco. And then on the other side of Alba, of the river, is Roero, and they have to call it that way, Roero. But it's always the same guy. So trellising system is called Guyot. In some other countries or some other area, you might have pergola, which is making the shoots grow higher and the berries fall, like you have to harvest this. It's called pergola. Or you have a cordone, non so come si dice in inglese. Cordone speronare. Well, there's just different trellising systems.
Right.
And for where we live, for the kind of soil we have, Guyot, that's how it's called, it's the best. And you'll see this trellising everywhere. It's just the same way.
And I would imagine if it's windy, you don't want them higher.
Bravo, esatto. Yeah. Nebbiolo, the canopy is quite high. It's about 2 meters because we trim the top. So for me, it's like I can barely reach it. Because that's another thing. My daddy is a freak about being organic and natural. Very little use of machines in the vineyards as well. So of course, when it gets to spraying time, you spray copper and sulfur. You use the machines, you use the tractors. But for cutting grass or hoeing or trimming, we go with clippers. When my neighbor, passes by with the air conditioning truck and the CDs and we're like tick, it's all by hand. But all these little details, I'm sure they make a difference. When you're doing it, you're like, crap. And I'm sure they at the end. Different techniques in winemaking. In the past was more in the big, large vats, and my dad with some other winemakers were the pioneers of what's called today the modernista, the modern style, which means we just basically use French barriques. And it's still this way today. It's funny to have this distinction today, modernist and traditionalist, because it doesn't really work that way anymore. If the wine is good, whatever. But it was very strong, 30, 40 years ago. They were physically fighting between themselves. Like, no, the small barrel is better than the large one. It was a physical fight between winemakers. Today, you use barrel, you use tank, you use cement, whatever. The wine is good, it's fine. We don't have a massive production. The total production in bottles, it's about, let's say from 50 to 70,000 bottles. So let's say 60 on an average year. We work 10 hectares, so we can definitely be considered a family-run estate. We have no managers, no consultants, no winemakers. We got the papa, Elio, supervising and controlling everyone, and then you got the slaves, us, and the Japanese in the room. So it's basically 5, 6 of us working, and that implies that you work every freaking single day, every Sunday, Monday, whatever. My parents, I live above the winery, so if someone buzzes the bell Christmas for, you know, tasting, we're open. So good and bad being here. Which is not a story, it's true, yeah. My grandpa was using these big, large wooden casks from, you know, Slavonian oak that were, you know, 100 years old from his grandpa, and they were stinky and dirty. And my father traveled to Burgundy and had seen those little barrels. So he came home thinking, maybe we should make wine with these little barriques instead of using these old, large, stinky woods. So he basically went to the hardware store in Alba and bought a chainsaw and start cutting all these big tanks in pieces. You know, tanks that were, today they could be in a museum. They were like 100 years old. So can you imagine how happy was my grandpa? My father cut everything into pieces, brought it in the backyard where they're actually constructing now, and made it just a big pile of fire. And my grandpa was so happy about his son that that day he decided not to work anymore in the vineyards or in the cellar. He left everything to Elio. Punching down means you have to mix the seeds, the skins and the juice, because when you squeeze a berry, what comes out is just a transparent liquid, right? How do you get the color? The color you get from the skins. But how do you get the color out of the skins is with like a friction, like you have to extract it. And the way it was done before, or still some winemakers do today, is just this manual work of punching down, pumping over the juice and making the cap always wet. With this machine, we just put the grapes in, computer, go to sleep. It really helps. So it's temperature control as well. And that allows us to have a very fast extraction of color, tannins, aroma in a very short time. Like dolcetto, the one we'll taste if you want to taste dolcetto, is 48 hours on the skins and it's pressed. The Barolo we'll taste is 5 days on the skins. Some winemakers, they'll tell you, no, you have to ferment at least 4 weeks. But with these machines, with the techniques we have and what we believe is right, it's 5 days. But one very important thing I wanted to tell you is that since Elio is very strict about natural, organic in the vineyards, we're as well very strict in the cellar. So as well the fermentation, how do you start the fermentation? Because you throw the grapes in there, it doesn't stop fermenting on its own. How do you start that? We don't use yeast to inoculate the fermentation, but we create our mother yeast. It's like when you make bread and you carry on always with the mother yeast with the dough. We create a mother yeast and we carry on for the whole harvest, and we always inoculate with that. So we don't buy the powder yeast that comes from Australia, and it's the same one they'll use in California as well. So Elio believes in creating his own mother yeast, and he has all these techniques and secrets that I won't tell you, and we just put it in there. And that 1 week before the big harvest, we harvest 150 kilos, 3-4 buckets of grapes. We put them in an open bin. We literally crush it with the feet. Just give it a little crush, and then you put a cloth on top, a piece of plastic, whatever, and we leave it outside, not in the sun, but outside in the heat. And that naturally, in a week, starts fermenting, because it's a small quantity. When then you harvest a week after the real harvest starts, you suck that mother yeast and you throw it in there, and that's like a bomb. It gives the food to the yeast to start, and then just like after 12 hours, the whole rotary fermenter goes bloop, bloop, bubbles. Then you have more grapes coming in to throw in that rotary. I get some juice, but literally 2 buckets of juice from here, throw it in there, it's like a chain. Once you start it basically doesn't stop. Unless you have a very concentrated warm year, and then it's very high, very little water, very little juice and lots of sugar, so the yeast may be a little bit more sensitive and die, but it happened like all three, sorry. It's pretty much the way all the wineries work here, organic. And it's not because we think it's fancy, because you put it on the labels, or because it's cool, but because we drink our wines, first of all. We work in our vineyards, and it's the most common thing to do. It comes naturally. Yeah. Actually, when someone sprays chemicals here, we look at that guy like, it's backwards. It's very unusual, I want to say. And plus, having 10 hectares is not like hundreds of hectares to handle. 10 hectares, it's a good size to handle, yeah.